All right. Okay, I'm Kirk Erickson, and we've been in Valley since 1849. All right. Okay. This is Henry Erickson. He was born in Norway, and he was the one that came over to the United States. He landed in Illinois with a lot of other Norwegian people, and there the missionaries came, and he was converted to the church, and he came across the prairie in 1849, and he was one of the captains of the people coming across. He settled in Mill Creek, about 45th South and 15th East. All right. He had 7 kids. Anyway, Jonas is the one that I come through. Well, he was around when the gold rush went, and him and his brother Eric went off with gold fever looking for gold. Well, he didn't find any, and he came home, but his brother ended up with typhoid fever and died in California looking for gold. Okay, well, he settled in, back then it was called Big Cottonwood, and he homesteaded, and he applied for a grant for, homestead, and this is the copy, well, this is the original of the land grant signed by Ulysses S. Grant. And they deeded it out in 160 acre sections, and then they would deed it to the one that had the largest section, and then he would deed out the other little parcels to the thing, and that's why we ended up with that. Okay, now Jonas was quite an entrepreneur, you might say. He had the first store, what they called it, mercantile, in Murray. And he had trouble, the mail for the farm and the mercantile kept getting mixed up, so he changed the way he spelled his name, and that's how come the way I spell Erickson is E-R-E-K-S-O-N. And so that's how Erickson's name here in the valley come, and it was real good. Anybody in the valley, if they was spelled this way, I knew that they were related to me. All right. He was in the cattle business too and did quite well. They had a ranch out at the head of Skull Valley, and he and his wife, Mary Jane Powell, on their homestead, built the house where I live now. All right, and it was the second house that they had built on the property.
You live in that house?
I do.
Wow.
Okay, it was built, this one was built in 1869. It's an adobe brick. And if you guys remember the old South Cottonwood Ward House, the guy that did the stucco work on that stayed at our place, and to pay for his room and board, he stuccoed the house, and so that's why it has the coined corners and stuff that look like the old South Cottonwood house, Ward House. All right.
What's that address? Where's that at?
It is 705 East Erickson View Circle. It's just off, do you remember where the old Erickson Dairy was?
Mm-hmm.
This is the old farmhouse. It used to be pink back then.
Wow.
All right. Okay, now, Jonas's wife, Mary Jane Powell, I got my wife, I'm gonna have her tell it. You wanna come up and tell about Mary Jane?
All right. Mary Jane Powell, when she joined the church, she came over as single and had two oxen that she brought over by herself. And then she met Jonas Erickson, and then they got married. After they were married, they had 7 children, and 3 of them passed away. And this really made her upset, and she wanted to find a way to help others. So she started reading a lot of medical books, and she tried to find all that she could to get her hands on to read medical books. And she got her nurse's degree, and then she got her doctor's degree. And she did a lot of midwifing, and she created a cure for diphtheria that she used to heal many people around. And I think she did most of her work in Tooele area and Lehigh area. And there was one family that had 10 children, all that came down with diphtheria, and she came and nursed them, and they all lived. And so she was pretty happy about being able to do that. And for payment of midwifing, she delivered a baby, and the family had brought a Austrian pine across in a teapot that was just a little sapling, and that they gave her as a payment, and then they planted it in our yard. In this picture, you can't see it, but if you know our house, on the east side, there's the huge pine tree that's twice the size of our house. That's the pine tree that she got paid for. And what else was it? You need to tell about Seba, and why the name, you forgot, which was his father.
Okay. Henrik, when he was in Norway, he lived by the sea, and his farm was called Sebo, which meant farm by the sea. And when he came to the United States, he couldn't speak English very good, and they'd ask him who he was, and he'd say, "I'm Henrik of Sebo." And they thought that's what his name was, Sebo. And so they called him Sebo or Sabi, so it was Henrik Sabi was a nickname that he got. All right. Anything else about Jonas? All right. The barn that was there was the second barn to be built in the valley. And my dad always told us that when Orrin Porter Rockwell was coming through, he'd always stay and slept in the barn. I thought that was pretty neat. And then I was talking to a guy at work, and they had a barn, and they said that Orrin Porter Rockwell stayed in that. So I think he stayed in a lot of barns. All right, Jonas got him a second wife. It was from John Benbow, the one that really helped the church out in England, and shortly after that he passed away. All right, James Theodore ended up inheriting the farm, and he liked doing the.
That make it easier.
Yeah. He liked doing they had a ranch out in Scava, and he liked being out there a lot. So they spent a lot of time out there. And he married Janet McMillan. And shortly after they were married, they were out there, and she was canning peaches, and she realized that she lost her wedding ring. And they kind of thought that the rooster had picked something shiny up, but they didn't was their prize rooster at the time. They didn't want to do anything to it. Anyway, so next year when they got another rooster and they retired that one and it gullet, they found a little oblong piece of gold that was gold ring. And James was really friendly with the Indians out there, and they showed him, they had an Indian burial cave out there, and it wasn't very big, it was really tight, and when I was a kid, they took me out and they showed it to me. I thought it was neat, and then when I got older, I thought I'd go back out and find it, and I couldn't find it. All right. Now James, at the farm, he had a blacksmith thing, blacksmith shop that he could repair anything. He didn't have the right tools, he could make them. He also had a thresher that at harvest time he'd go and thresh everyone else's corn, wheat. He also had the sawmill. And we still have the saw for it, and it's a great big round one. And to begin with, he'd set up the horses that would turn the thing, like the thresher, to run the sawmill, and then later he got a little wide engine to run it with the big belts and stuff. And so they saw the wood for the wood stoves for the thing. Coal wasn't too plentiful at the time, and they did it until coal became real plentiful. Anything else?
Yeah, out in Twilla, or out in Skull Valley, the area that your folks had was called Erickson, Utah, and their closest neighbor was Porter Rockwell. So I believe he stayed in your parking lot.
Yes. If you go out there now, there's Erickson's Pass, and through the years someone goes, oh, they spelled it wrong, and they changed the spelling, so I'm not quite as excited as I was when I was a kid. And I'd go out there and I always stop and take a picture of Erickson Pass with those Bureau of Land Management signs. All right. And then the next, James had two kids, Mary Fern and James Theodore, and to distinguish between father and son, they called him J Erickson. Some of you might remember Jay used to be a state patriarch, bishop of the South Cottonwood Ward, and in his younger days he raised pigeons, and I think it got him excited about raising chickens. He started, when he came home off his mission, his dad bought him a little 10-acre farm that was next to where Erickson Dairy is, and he started raising chickens. And he built a coop, and after he got that paid for, he built another coop, and then he switched to turkeys, and got it going real good. Well, then, and James married Kate Miller, and he ran turkeys. Anyway, they had 4 boys and 1 girl, and brothers, the Erickson brothers, decided that they would take their farm, which back then, you'd have a cow, you'd milk, you'd have chickens for the eggs, you'd have a pig or 2, and they started increasing the herd and started selling, they began selling raw milk, and then later on they did pasteurization, and we went from a small, 1 or 2 cows, when the dairy was really running. We were milking 200 cows, which meant that we had 500 head on the farm to replace them, and we were I think the largest dairy west of the Mississippi at the time. Nowadays, if you don't have 1,000 cows, you're not hardly anything, and they milk them 3 times a day, and it sounds like work. All right.
How many acres was the ranch or farm?
They sold pieces off here and there. It was 60 when the dairy was going good. If I recall right. All right.
Did that include the turkey farm up there?
No, the turkey farm was extra. And my dad and one of the brothers bred the turkeys, and then my dad and 2 of his others, Quentin and Vaughn. My dad was Jack Erickson. They ran the dairy. And so some years the turkeys did real good, and some years the cows did real good. And then they found it was even more profitable to raise houses than cows, and sold out. So I mentioned the area they settled in first was, they called it Big Cottonwood, and then later it was South Cottonwood, and just recently it was Murray. And I grew up on 59th and about 50 East, and we were still in the county, so I went to Granite School District, I went to Woodstock Elementary, and Cottonwood High School, and everyone else would be walking the other way, going to McMillan and Murray High School, and used to get in fights with them as I go to school. But later on, we became real good friends. All right, now, one thing about South Cottonwood, I should mention the church, the old South Cottonwood Ward. It was one of the first wards outside of Salt Lake, and if my memory holds right, it used to go from 45th South to the point of the mountain, from the mountain to mountain. He says, boy, that sounds like a big ward, but you got to remember there wasn't very many people there, and through the years it got subdivided and all that. And growing up, that was the church house that I went to, and the things I remember, it was built out of adobe, and they used it for everything. I read in some of the histories that they went to school there. They had dances, and that's my mother and father were lined up on a blind date, and the first date they went was to the dance club at Cottonwood, South Cottonwood Courthouse. As a kid, we used to go over there and watch movies, and because the building was built out of adobe, the walls were like 1.5 foot thick. The windows had you could sit in them. And it was always neat for the kids if you got to sit in the window when you was watching the movie or any program, and that was excitement. And the chapel, it was different than ones nowadays. Instead of having the pulpit right in the center, it was off to the left, the audience, and it was as high as the back row of the choir seats. And the bishop could sit there, and he could see everybody in the audience, and he could watch the choir sing. And that was neat. And at the head of the church, they had a picture of Pilate before Christ. And as a deacon, I sat and stared at that every time and got every detail. And after the church come in and says, oh, we don't want to have pictures in the chapel anymore, but because it was a special picture, they moved it from the front to the side for a while. And when they tore down the old South Cottonwood building and built a new one, it's now out in the lobby. And when my Aunt Fern passed away, I was talking to my cousins, and I says, oh yeah, I used to sit and stare at the picture and at all the details, and I found out that that's what they did too. And another thing that I remember is the ward clerk used to sit up at a little desk behind the sacrament table to take notes, and Mark Red was the last ward clerk that I remember sitting up there with his short little pencil taking notes. Okay, now we get down to the last son in this picture, and it's me. And when I was a kid, I milked cows, I fed the calves, I could fix the fence, I helped my dad irrigate a little bit, and I left on my mission. It was a full-fledged farm, and when I got back, there were houses. At that time, we switched to, we'd buy our milk from Western General, and we'd bottle it, and we had Smart Lines dry cows at our place, so it looked like we were a real dairy farm. And what I think was interesting is I went to England, and one of my areas, it was called Yeadon, and it's during World War II. They had a factory up there, but they had fake cows, and every day they would move the cows around, so when the pilots came over, they would think that it was farmland instead of a factory. And so that's when I thought, oh, we got Smart Line dairy cows, so it looks like we're really a dairy, even though we're buying our milk from someone else and bottling it. The dairy's gone. I'm not in the farm anymore. I'm a mailman now. I deliver the Freudig's mail and that. Does anybody have any questions?
Can I take a look at that homestead paper you had there?
The land grant?
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Do you remember what was written on Jonas Erickson's grave?
It was
No?
stranger. On his gravestone it says, stranger as you pass by, as you are now, I once was. As I am now, you'll become. Take a note of my birthday and death date. But it's not there anymore because he created it and they put a different headstone on it.
Growing up, I remember another Erickson dairy on 9th East, farther north.
All right.
Is that the same family, or?
Okay, when Jonas married his second wife, the kicked him out of the house, and he moved over kind of where the sports mall is, and started another dairy. And the second wife's family is those Ericksons. That
Did you mention what your father's name was?
it's Jack Erickson.
My great-grandfather was the bishop of the South Concord Ward from 1870 to 1900, James Sharp Law, whose home that the Reds live in now, not the home, not there anymore, but that's where they live. He had one family in Murray, and my matriarch was in Draper.
So did he farm where Red's house was?
Yes, all around there and to the west.
And across the street from the Reds, there used to be a barn there. Was that
No, that wasn't here. That was
house?
Howard.
One thing about the house, they knew how to do it.
I gotta tell you something. When we first moved out here, I was walking over to the church house from my place, and I don't know if any of you remember Luella Finlayson, but she came out of her house. She lived kind of across from the church house. She came out of her house and waved at me and waited for me to get close enough so she could see me, and then she got this strange look on her face, and she said, "Oh, you're not who I thought you were." She thought I was Kirk's mother. So,
What year did you move in to that home?
1963.
All right. My mom and Beverly got mixed up for years. People thought that. All right, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay.
When Jonas came from Norway, is that what you said?
Yes, he was a kid. His father was Henry.
Okay, so he came with his father.
Yes.
Well, no, I mean, you said that he led, did his father lead the company of saints over?
Yes.
So his father did. What was his father's name?
Henry.
Oh, I see, you just said that. Okay, all right, thank you.
I know it's kind of confusing because there's James Theodore, and they do a lot of the same thing.
So how old was Jonas when he came?
I think he was 6.
Oh, he was pretty young.
Pretty young. All right. Yes?
Are Reed and Arian Erickson part of your family?
Yeah, they're through the second wife of Jonas.
Yeah, Arian's the one that had the dairy up on 9 East.
Okay, now I've got to tell you a story about Verily.
Uh-oh.
When I was a kid, I used to hang out with her son, Edward. Anyway, they had this German Shepherd dog, Sheba, and it got older and older. Anyway, it was time to put Sheba down, and one day Mark come home, and Verily met him with a gun at the door and says, "You either put him down or I'll do it." And isn't that how the story went?
Not quite. Want me to tell the real way?
Yes.
First of all, it wasn't Sheba. She was a German Shepherd. This dog was a little dog about this big, and it had distemper. It was laying out under a tree, just trembling and shaking and pain. And Mark was not home. Nobody was home but me. So I went downstairs and got a pistol, loaded it up. In the meantime, I shot a hole in the kitchen floor. Anyway, I went out and shot the dog. And then when they came home, I said, "You better go out and bury that dog."
What you can see, stories kind of get twisted as they get told and told and told.
Well, sometimes they can become more colorful.
All right, I got a question for you. All right, you've gathered together tonight as Sons of Utah Pioneers. Why is it important?
Because those are the pioneers we're talking about.
Yes.
They're the ones.
It's important that we continue their traditions and honor them for what they've done for us and remember them so that they can be remembered for what they've done for us. Because if you don't honor your progenitors and remember them to others and to your family, they'll soon be forgotten and no one will realize what they did for us.
The other thing I think that we need to remember is that our children and our grandchildren, they need to understand what the pioneers did because they are today's pioneers. Their pioneer trick is not across the plains pulling a cart, but theirs is a different trick. And they are pioneers just the same. And we need to all understand that all generations have different kinds of pioneer experiences.
Yeah. Anybody else want to?
I think we need to know our roots so we know who we are.
Okay, but you can do that through genealogy. But you picked out pioneers that come to Utah.
Mine's kind of goes on the same line. I think it helps give our own lives stability if we know who we came from, where we came from, what the people were like.
Okay, and one thing about the pioneers, okay, when that house was built, it was built in 1869. That's when the railroad came in, and anyone that came after that was not considered a Utah pioneer. I mean, but I'll agree with you that the kids today are being pioneers on what they're doing. But it was the journey to get to Salt Lake. They sacrificed, it was cold, you ate dust, you walked and walked. Whereas the ones that came in the train, they just sat there and watched the scenery go by they didn't have the journey.